Welcome to Talking Heads on USA Global TV, starring the one and only wonderful Dr. Jacqueline. It's a prestigious place where world-class influencers and experts meet, and where you'll find the most trusted advisors and coaches for all things in life and business. Visit usaglobaltv.com to sign up for our newsletter, get the value you need, and be first in line to learn about events and giveaways and other valuable content. Connect with us. Email Dr. Jacqueline at usaglobaltv.com to talk about how you can become part of USA Global TV. That's USA Global TV, where the doctor is always in.
Hi, red.olaughlin here with USA Global TV and Radio, and we're on the Talking Head show. That's a show, 30-minute show generally, where the guest, the presenter, in this case me, will talk about a particular subject. We finished a couple sections on pain and options, and we're going to be talking about fat management. What does that really mean? So why don't you bring up the first slide, Dr. Jacqueline? I should be able to take it from there. Thank you. Fat management. Well, before we get specifically in that, let me go ahead and give a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm a researcher. I'm not a doctor, never been associated with the medical field, never part of the pharmaceutical industry, but I research. I research the human body at the cellular level, chemically speaking. I look for cause and effect relationships. Treat a cause, fix a problem. Treat a symptom, and you'll always be treating symptoms. My first love was chemistry. Long before I ever met my wife, we just celebrated 54 years of marriage. And for me, diving into the human body and looking at the chemistry of what's going on is one of my passions. Unfortunately, I never really get a chance to practice chemistry in the real world because I get an invitation to Vietnam. And then by the time you get back from there, too many things have changed, lots of everything going on. Regardless, many, many, many years later, I retired from the Navy. I kept doing things for a while. A few years after that, I retired from the business world, about 15 years worth now. And one of the things I got involved with was self-improvement, motivation. But as I started changing my area of focus, I wanted to get in health and wellness. And I wrote a book called Results Matter when you want to lose weight and keep it off. And it's still available actually on Barnes & Noble. I checked this morning. I took it off of Amazon a long time ago because I wanted to rewrite it to incorporate some of the latest fad diets and things like that. So I figured, let me just rewrite the book. It's been about 10 years. And so the book is still available as an ebook. I think on Nook is what they call it on Barnes & Noble. But what I'm doing here over the next 6 weeks is I'm going to be talking about fat and how do you manage it. And when we look at fat management, what does that really mean? Well, when we talk about fat, we're going to get into the deal. When you want to manage your fat, that's how we store and retrieve fat for whatever we need. So fat management is a generic term that I associate with all the different things that we do in our body that involve fat. So let's go ahead and move on. So basic questions we're looking at, and not all of these will be answered today, and not all the questions that you expect to be answered today will be answered. Today is an introduction. So what is fat? Where does it come from? What does our bodies do with it? And then the big 4 questions that everybody wants to know the answer to is what causes fat to go into a fat cell? What causes fat to come out of a fat cell? What causes fat to burn? What stops fat from burning? So if you know the answers to those 4 questions, you ought to be able to manage the fat in your body well. However, there are problems because the older we get, a lot of other factors start to happen. Age, hormone, enzymes, it goes on and on and on. We are not as efficient, as effective as we were earlier. So what may have worked at 22 years of age doesn't work as well at 42 years of age. And I guarantee you at 62 years of age, it works even less. But it doesn't mean that you can't make things work. It's just there are things out there. And this is all education. This is awareness. This is the first step in learning something new. So as we go through these things, this is a place for you to say, do I need to change a lifestyle? If I'm on prescription meds for something, you really need to talk to your doctor first about adopting any of these things. If you're not and you're a pretty healthy person, then these are things that you might want to consider. But again, talk to your doctor in regard to anything that you might want to take that's really outside your norm, your lifestyle. So what is fat? Simply, it's a molecule. It's a chemical like anything else. It's made up of one glycerol molecule and 3 fatty acids. The glycerol molecule basically comes from our carbohydrates that we eat. It provides a molecule. It's called a glycerol phosphate. And when the three fatty acids are combined to it, now we have a triglyceride. We've heard that term quite a bit. So, but fat is used for a number of healthy things in the body. It's there. It's our energy source. Without it, we would not be able to do anything. It protects our organs. Some of us have a lot more extra protection than others. It supports cell growth. And it's really there for the absorption of the nutrients, the vitamins and the minerals and the other things that we need. There's a lot of things that fat does positively in the body. However, when that fat becomes an issue where you end up with a waist that's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or more inches bigger than it should be, now that fat almost takes on the aura of being another organ in the body, just like your pancreas or your heart or your brain. It's an organ all into itself. It really almost has its own lifestyle. It's actually acting on our bodies much more so than people who don't have that. So fat is necessary, but then again, too much of a good thing. So fat comes from the foods we eat and the metabolic processes. So when we eat, let's say that I have a nice hamburger today. If I have it without the bun, then I'm not taking in the extra carbohydrates. But if I have it with the bun, I have the fat from the hamburger. I have whatever else is on my hamburger. I have the carbohydrates from the bread. I get the proteins from the meat. So when I start eating this stuff, those fatty acids from the fats and the meat, the proteins, the carbohydrates, all start going through the stomach, and things start to happen almost instantly. In fact, literally from our brains, things happen because we expect things to happen. But as they start going through the body, things then start to break down. We have fat in our food, but they're pretty good size. They're not really taken care of by our digestive system as well as it should be. So as they start getting further into they go through our stomach, they get into our intestines, and we end up with larger drops of fat. They're attacked by the bile acids from the gallbladder, and that they emulsify and basically makes the big ones much smaller. And so you end up with smaller fat molecules. The enzymes from our pancreas, they break down these large fat molecules into glycerol and fatty acids, and they're absorbed into the intestinal walls. And this is the beginning of that fat management process that we're talking about today. So you have that fat that's now broken down from a large triglyceride or from individual fatty acids, and now it's put back together. Why? Because that triglyceride needs a protective barrier on the outside, a covering. And so you end up with a protective protein covering on the outside that's done inside the intestines. And that is then sent out into our system, actually into our lymphatic system. Typically from our guts, all of those nutrients and everything that gets sent out through our immune system into our bloodstream. Well, fat is too big to go into the bloodstream in and of itself. But if it gets into our lymphatic system and drains into our bodies, it's going to end up down in the body where our veins are at. So it goes from the arteries into the veins, into the capillaries. So when it gets down far enough, you're actually going to get holes open up large enough for the fat molecules to get into. And so as those fat molecules combine with the glucose, the amino acids, the fatty acids, all those things, then we actually stimulate the activation of insulin. And when that happens, insulin is the primary director. It takes that glucose and sends it to be stored as fat or to be used as energy. It's the prime director for where those things go. It sends the amino acids into proteins for storage in the muscles. It sends the fatty acids into the fat cells in order to be used for energy. So the insulin is really the good guy because it's the one in charge of where everything is dealt and where everything goes. And that's where our absorption process begins. So in that particular part, everything is good. And we would think that, okay, fine. Why should I have a problem? Well, we don't always eat the way we should. And when you start looking back into the history of fat, we never really, yeah, you could go back and find some emperors and things that probably were obese or grossly obese. But for most of the history, we didn't really have an obesity problem. Certainly nothing like we have today. And when you look at it, it's probably the 20s before 1920s, before 100 years ago, before, okay, what's going on in our bodies? And literally, it wasn't until 1956 that we were able to actually measure fatty acids in the body. So it's only been 60 some years. It's not even that long that the science has actually been able to tell us what's going on in our bodies. Well, the standard theory says that I eat something, fat is extracted from whether it's fat that I'm eating or from the carbohydrates that will create the glucose, which can become fat down the road. I use that energy that's created by the food, and whatever energy I don't use is converted to fat. If I use too much energy, I'm going to extract some fat away from my body, and it's going to cause me to lose weight, lose inches. Well, in theory, that's probably pretty good. So if I'm a really healthy individual, I eat just the right amount of the right kinds of food. I am going to take in the food. What I need right now for energy is going to be used usually as glucose, but we have those fatty acids that provide the energy that we need. It's going to be stored in fat cells because I have too much available right now and I'm not using it up fast enough. But as my food is digested and everything is taken care of, it's been a few hours since I've eaten. Well, I still have a lifestyle that I'm operating to. I still have a requirement for the energy that I'm using. And so the body goes into those fat cells and extracts out what it needs right now to maintain that energy level that we have. And if everything was perfect, we would store the fat that we need for later on before we eat our next meal. And then just about the time we're eating that next meal, I would exhaust all of the extra fat that I need, and I'd maintain weight. I'd be nice and slim and trim and thin, would not have to worry about a thing, and have all the exercise energy that I need. But things don't always operate that way. We end up gaining some weight. And it may have been real easy back in your teens or 20s to get rid of it. But as you add on an extra decade or two or three or four, you find out that those little things that happen with aging create a problem. But now let's really look at what's happening in the body. Fat that we talk about, generally fat, exists in a couple different forms. We talk about free fatty acids. These are little molecules of fat. They're all the same. They're flowing around. Our bodies use those fatty acids actually for energy. We store the fat in something called a triglyceride. The carbohydrates provide, as mentioned earlier, a glycerol phosphate molecule. When they are taken into a fat cell, the glycerol is then broken down. That phosphate gives up three links, and those links then attach to the fatty acids, and we have what's called a triglyceride, tri meaning three. So that fat is continually in motion. That those fatty acids are coming in and out of the fat cells. So when you need the fat, they're extracted. When you don't need the fat, they're stored. So the fat is going back and forth. And if we're going to be managing fat, we need to know what things cause the fat to go into the fat cells, what things cause the fat to come out of the fat cells, because that's the motion that's continually present. And so if we start looking at what controls those things, well, one of the two things that happens when we look at our fat management is you get two lipases. One's called a lipoprotein lipase. The other one's called a hormone sensitive lipase. LPL causes fat to go into a fat cell. Insulin causes fat to go into a fat cell. So you got two things, major issues in the body that wants to store fat, wants to push fat into a fat cell. So you have those things. The LPL lipoprotein lipase are actually like little hair triggers. And they're sitting on the outside of the fat cell. And in the bloodstream, you have a little fatty acid come by. It's going to reach out there and grab it. It goes right by that little hair trigger, and it's like it's caught and sent right through the cell. The holes are small enough; it goes right into the fat cell. The fat cell, because of the way it was formed from the carbohydrate, you have glycerol molecules in there. As you get three fatty acids in there, those things combine and cause a triglyceride. Triglyceride molecules are too big to leave the fat cell. They're stuck in there until you have something come in there and cause it to operate differently. So the prime directive of the LPL is to actually pull fatty acids from our bloodstream and store them in the fat cells. As okay, there we go. As these fat, as these little molecules of fat are captured, uh, another thing can also happen is that a triglyceride molecule may be bumping into this fat cell, and the LPL can actually strip the glycerol away and capture the three fatty acids. So you got kind of a double whammy effect. It's going to pick up the fatty acids anyway. I get a nice big molecule called a triglyceride. If it happens to bump into that molecule, now all of a sudden it's going to disrupt that, get rid of the glycerol, and take in the fatty acids. Sounds like a no-win situation. And then as we store more and more, these fat cells keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then before you know it, there's an extra inch, 2 inches, 6 inches, whatever it may happen to be. Now, where we store the fat out is different. For men, we store it in our chest, our buttocks. It's just a different place. Women store it in their breasts. They store it in their waist, in their hips, buttocks. So depending on whether you have fat being directed by testosterone or estrogen, you're going to have fat storage in different parts of the body. That's just the way the human body operates. And then as you start to exercise and we have a need for more energy, typically our energy is contained in our muscles in the form of a glycogen that came from our pancreas. Well, that glycogen provides that instantaneous energy that we need to do whatever we're doing. But as we continue to exercise and the body says, hey, I'm going to run out here pretty quickly, I need some extra energy in order to handle things, the LPL is going to, because exercise is going to be inhibited. It's just going to kind of fall down and not be as active. But you also have LPL on the muscle tissues themselves. And then they actually are dormant until you start exercising a little bit more than just a typical lifestyle requires. That extra exercise then activates them, opens them up, and now they're going to capture fatty acids that are coming by in our bloodstream and use those fatty acids as the energy source. So typically we're going to be using glucose in the form of glycogen for our energy, but when we need it, we're going to start using the fatty acids. And if we exercise long enough and we don't have that insulin to drive everything in, the LPL on the cells are there, I'm going to actually start pulling the fatty acids out of the fat cells because I need them from my exercise. So that fat storage becomes a in and out situation. And that is one of those things that, okay, fine, exercise more. Well, one of the studies that was done a long time ago, they took a bunch of marathon runners, and you would think that if I'm practicing for marathons and running marathons, I'd lose a lot of weight just because of all the exercise I'm doing. But they end up having fat stored on their bodies that just does not leave, because exercise in and of itself might account for maybe 15% of that fat loss. But there are other things you need to get rid of that fat, and it just doesn't happen always with exercise. And the older you are, the less effective those things are. Now, I'm not telling you exercise is not good. It's actually exceptionally good. A lot of things happen with that exercise, but it's not the panacea. It's not the cure-all for everything. One of the other lipases I mentioned a moment ago, hormone-sensitive lipase, HSL. That is the hormone that operates to get the fat out of the fat cell. In other words, I need fat for energy. That HSL is going to go down there, that fat cell, and do its job. And you're going to have these fatty acids just leaving the body as fast as they can because my body has a demand for that energy. So that HSL forces fat out of the fat cell. So you have LPL and insulin forcing fat into the fat cell. There are other things too. And we have HSL forcing fat out of the fat cell. So that's kind of the basic answer, but we're going to get into a lot more detail about that because there's more things going on. We're at this 30,000 foot level. We're going to get down into the cellular level of the body and become more aware of what we can do, what inhibits this, so we'll get to that. So this HSL basically is a counter. It's a big hammer that can swing back against LPL and insulin. So what stimulates the HSL to be more effective? Well, fasting is one of those things. If I don't have insulin because I'm not eating, I don't have carbohydrates, then my insulin levels go down low. I have a need because I'm still exercising. I have a need, and I have a need for energy. So that HSL is going to be there pulling the fat out of my fat cells to provide that energy for me. As I start looking at things, if I'm a pretty healthy person, my fat's going to be stored basically under the skin because it's going to be real easy to be pulled out, to be provided to the muscles. So the fat for a healthy person, you just don't have an extra 3 or 4 or 5 inches of fat around the belly or the buttocks or the chest or wherever it may happen to be. So that healthy person, in an ideal world, I would have just a perfect combination of carbohydrates, fatty acids, fats, proteins. I'd be able to pull those in, and by the course of just getting the fat into glycogen, be stored in my muscles, get the fat stored in my fat cells, I would be able to use those. My lifestyle says I'm going to be doing this and this and this. I pull down my storage of fats through the glycogen. I'm doing everything I need to do. Pretty soon, all of that's used up. I need more. It goes to my subcutaneous fat cells. I pull the fatty acids out that I need right now. And at the end of that particular cycle, I've used up all of my stored fats, or basically all of them, and I'm ready to eat again. And this whole thing goes over and over and over again. Well, that's in an ideal world. It's sort of an adjunct to the standard theory. The standard theory says, you have 1,500 calories to burn 1 pound of fat. No, 3,500 calories to burn 1 pound of fat. And when you start exercising, okay, fine. If I'm doing this exercise, I'm swimming, I'm bicycling, or whatever, I'm burning, 300 calories an hour. I'm doing this, I ought to be able to lose, 1 pound a week, a half a pound a week because I'm adding extra exercise. Well, if all you're doing is measuring your fat by the weight that shows up on the balance in your bathroom, muscle weighs more than fat. So if you're exercising, you're increasing your muscle, you're adding more weight with muscle, you may be getting rid of fat. So there's a trade-off between the muscle weight that you're gaining and the fat that you're losing. Now, maybe a different approach would be, I want to lose inches. I don't want to worry about what the scale says. That's a different mindset entirely. So if I want to lose 7 inches from my gut, from my waist, maybe that ought to be the focus of what your lifestyle is, more so than I just want to see my weight get down to 150 pounds or 200 pounds or whatever it may be. So look at a different way, because once you start getting your subconscious mind set in to diets and exercise and everything else, it's a powerful ally to have to accomplish something, but it's also a powerful foe that's not going to allow you to do things. So those people who have failed at diets in the past, start a new diet, have little success because your subconscious mind is really going to be acting against you. In addition to your subconscious mind, your age, the diet that you choose, if it's more carbohydrates than fats, than proteins. If you're on a low carbohydrate diet, that's great. You're minimizing your insulin. A lot of things can happen with that. I was on Atkins for about 6 years. Oh, I lost a lot of weight, 40, 50 pounds. I lost a lot of inches, more than 7 or 8. I was looking good, feeling good. I just didn't have any glycogen, any fat storage. I used to go out and run literally hour and a half without a problem. I couldn't run 2 miles. I out of energy. I mean, totally out of energy before I got 2 miles. So my lifestyle said at that time, I enjoyed running for 40, 45, 50 minutes, an hour, whatever it was. I couldn't do it because I didn't have any stored fat in order to provide that energy. Now, as you start using fat, you're changing the fat energy from using glucose as its primary driver for our energy to using ketones. And then we have that, we have the keto diet, we have the ketosis we hear about. But as we start using a different diet, let's say we go to a keto diet or an Atkins diet, several things happen, because as you focus in on, okay, I'm going to be 70% of my diet is going to be fat. Well, we're going to be using that fat. We may not have the carbohydrates. We may not be activating the insulin, but we're causing other problems to happen, because proteins and fats and carbohydrates all cause a certain level of acidity in the body. So I'm looking at, what do I need to keep an alkaline body, because I don't want to be in acidosis all the time. That's going to pull calcium out of my blood, out of my bones, and be able to stabilize the pH of my bloodstream. So if I'm eating nothing but proteins and fats, and I love that on Atkins. I love the diet when I was on Atkins. I just didn't think there was anything better. But I wasn't eating any fruits and vegetables. Green was not part of my life. But as I learned later on, first time I had a bone density test, I was osteopenia. I've been lifting weights for decades. I'd been running for decades, and I never expected to have a bone issue, bone problem, bone density problem. Well, part of the problem was I shifted my lifestyle to eating fats and proteins and no fruits and vegetables. I increased my acidity in my body. It caused the uh, calcium to come out of the bones, but it also caused other things to happen too. Because as you start pulling those things, and I start, okay, I need to get more calcium into my bones. Okay, I need magnesium to make that calcium more absorbable. I need vitamin D3 to get into the bloodstream. And here's the problem: if I get that calcium into the bloodstream to replace the calcium in the bones that I've been using up, if I don't have enough vitamin K2, it's going to go to your heart valves and arteries and start adding more plaque there. So it's not just a simple matter of trying to balance everything along the way. It's understanding, if I do this, what else happens? Well, okay, fine. If I do this, can I? Well, so as you're looking at trying to lose some inches off your waist, there's more than just a simple matter of giving up carbohydrates, eating more of this, whatever. So that's what we're going to be talking about here over the next 5 or 6 weeks. Unfortunately, there's no real easy test for insulin resistance. Yeah, we probably have it, but we don't know we have it. But there are hints, clues. Age is probably a good indicator. If you have high blood sugar, I measure it. That's probably a good indicator. If I have high cholesterol, high triglycerides, high HDL, low HDL and high LDL cholesterol, those are all good clues that I probably have insulin resistance. And when I start this insulin resistance, now everything that I wanted to do that operated really well when I was healthy is not working as well. And so I'm taking insulin, putting the glucose into the cells for energy. But now I have extra insulin because it's not working as well. When I have 100 units here, now they're only acting as 80. The body says I need 100. It produces another 20. And all of a sudden I get this extra insulin and it's not doing what I need. I end up storing more fat than I should. That's just part of the problem. But a lot of these things can be avoided and controlled. And that's what we're going to talk about. So this is literally the first of 6 programs, basic introduction. We could talk about good fats and bad fats and white fats and brown fats. We all have white fat now. As a baby, you had brown fat. It's rare to find brown fat in an adult. It's just not there. When you're pregnant, you end up with a lot more fat because that's the design of the pregnancy, 15 to 30 pounds in most cases. So fat is needed for a lot of things. The glucose is our primary energy system. We're going to be talking more about that. And then we're going to want to be able to answer the main questions, what can I do? And that's the detail level that we're getting into. And so as I start leaving this program for today, and I didn't update my pain management, it's fat management, but I can be reached at red.olaughlin.com. My 2 primary books that I look at here, because my specialty is longevity. How can I live to a nice, healthy age and avoid a lot of the age-related diseases? That's what that information is. The book on the joy of ageless health deals more with how do I prevent disease. But when you're looking at the same things for aging, that issue of fat becomes a major part of the body, because if you have too much, it's like adding an extra organ to the body, and then it has a mind of its own. We end up with a lot more inflammation. The inflammation creates problems. So again, the next 5 weeks, we're going to delve into the subject of fat management. We already did pain management. Do fat management and answer, hopefully, those kind of questions that you need. So, Dr. Jacqueline, I think that's the end for today's show.